Hey there, brothers and sisters. Tristan the Christian here, bringing you my Spring 2022 in the bag, sponsored by Adopt Disc Golf. First off, I'm going to start off with my putters. And for all of you that know me, I am Team Envy. So I have here my two putters. This one specifically I'm using as my putting putter, and this one I use as my throwing putter. This one definitely has more of a turn on it, and when this one starts to get beat in, I switch over to my yellow one. As you can see through the video, that the yellow one seems to fly a little bit more understable than a normal Envy should, and my blue one flies about the way that it should. The plastic that I have for both of these is Electron firm, and I like that because when I'm gripping my putter, I don't like to have it very flexible in my hand. I want it to be stiff and rigid. Next on my list are all my approach discs. So first off, we're going to start with my Electron firm Proxy, here with my Wyatt Tyler stamp. This one I love to throw when I'm in a very narrow fairway, and I kind of got to get that hyzer flip, but I really don't want it to go too far, or I'm safe and comfortable for it to be able to fail far to the right. Next up, I have two entropies. I have my Neutron entropy here with my Amanda Melwicki Charlie stamp, and I have an Electron entropy, and the reason I use one over the other is what I want to happen when it hits the green. So if I'm okay if it skips a little bit, or I want a little bit of skip, I'm gonna go with my Neutron one. If I don't want any skip, or if I want to throw something that's a little bit more understable than my Neutron one, because this one flies pretty, not very overstable, but as overstable as an entropy should, I'll throw my Electron one, which is slightly more understable than my Neutron entropy. Next up, we'll move into my mid-ranges. And I have what every person should have in their bag, the Uplink. The Uplink is a really versatile disc when you need it to go super far to the right. Now, mind you, I'm throwing right-hand backhand mostly, and I do sometimes throw a right-hand forehand. So if I say to the right or to the left, that is based on a right-hand backhand throw. But I can throw it at a very steep hyzer angle, and it will flip up flat and just keep fading to the right whenever I need it to. Next up, I have my Neutron Hex here with my Danbrook Wells Running Bear stamp. And this one I'm throwing when I need a straight to stable short shot. So this one will be a little bit longer than when I'm throwing my Envy, which is a straight to stable putter throw. This one will fade out a lot more than the Uplink will, to make sure that I'm gonna be staying on the left side or even the center of the fairway, depending on if I throw it flat or with a little bit of anhyzer. I don't use the reactor because the reactor actually flies much more stable than I want it to. And so for that reason, I use the Hex. Next up, I have my Pyro with my Tyler Taylor Conkus TK Disc Golf stamp. This one I love for forehands, short forehands specifically. And then when I really need that overstable kick that you would get from more than the entropy would give me. Next up, we're gonna go into my fairways. And I used to have several fairways in my bag, but I've slimmed it down to really two because it seems to be the only two that I end up throwing. We're first gonna start off with my Crave. So this is a Sarah Hokum Signature Crave in Neutron. And this is incredibly stable. I don't mean overstable, I don't mean understable. I mean, when I throw it, I expect nothing less than it to go just perfectly straight. It really is true to the numbers, where I have a slight turn off of the tee, and then it will fade back ever so slightly right at the end of the flight. Next up, I have my Adopt Disc Golf Silent Night stamped resistor. And this thing is my #1 go-to forehand throwing disc. It is overstable enough that I'm not worried about it fading off to the left when I'm throwing forehands. And it will stay in flight enough with the glide that it has in order to make backhands go a little bit further than maybe the Pyro would. I love this disc so much that it is one of the most used discs in my bag. Next up, we're gonna get into my distance drivers, and you will see I have a lot of a certain disc, and I'll explain why. So here I have 3 viruses. Now the virus is a very, very understable distance driver, but I don't use it to drive very often. I think I've found one hole at IDGC that I liked to throw it on because I needed a super steep hyzer to throw it and I needed it to fade right. So that's the only time that I've ever used this backhand, and I will never use this forehand because it flips a lot. So what do I use this for? Tomahawks. Yes, tomahawks. So I know a lot of people will tell you that thumbers and tomahawks should be overstable discs. And while I don't disagree with that, I find that the virus, being the most understable disc, or one of the most understable discs that MVP has, is a much better tomahawk throwing disc, and I'll explain why. When you're throwing a tomahawk or a thumber, the stability of the disc is what is going to determine how quickly it comes out of that throw to dive to the ground. So if I'm throwing my virus and I throw it out like this, it should turn very quickly and dive to the ground. Now, why do I want it to dive to the ground quickly? That's great. So if I'm throwing thumbers or tomahawks, I have a very narrow fairway that I'm trying to hit, or a very specific distance. So I can get my tomahawks out to about 220 feet, or I can hit a very narrow fairway that will flip very quickly and then dive off to the left of that fairway. Or if I'm throwing a thumber, to the right of the fairway. I carry 3 of these for 2 reasons. 1, they all have different weight ranges. And 2, when you throw a tomahawk or thumber, there's a good likelihood, especially if you're in the woods, that you're gonna end up getting it stuck into a tree. So I keep a plethora of them because this is one of my favorite throws and one of my most reliable throws when I'm in a narrow fairway in the woods. Next up are 3 brand new discs that I've just added to the collection. And first off, I'll start with the inertia. So this plasma inertia is 171 weighted, and it has replaced my Insanity. So the Insanity I had was my understable distance driver that would fade off to the right when I'm throwing backhand, or would turn off to the right when I'm throwing backhand, and then it would fade back ever so slightly just at the end to make sure that I was kind of center of the fairway. I didn't want that a whole lot. I only know a couple of holes that I would throw that on. When I'm throwing an understable disc, I expect it to continue to the right. So this one, when I'm throwing it, I can throw it at a pretty steep hyzer. It will hyzer flip up and slowly fade to the right and continue going until it hits a tree or the ground. And that's what I love about this disc so much. Next up, I have 2 Teslas. And like I said, I don't carry too many of the same molds around, but this Tesla here is a 156 weighted, and this one is a 164. And what the difference between them does is that the 156 weighted one gives me a little bit more hyzer flip as I'm throwing it, because I can get a little bit more arm speed behind it. The 164 doesn't give me as much of that flip, and will give me a little bit more reliable of a fade out at the end the way that I expect it to. Lastly, I have my distance drivers. So I have an 11 speed Cameron-Beck Photon here, and this thing is beef. When I throw it, I expect nothing less than a super fade. there is virtually zero turn on this disc. And this is what I'm throwing when I really need the distance of a long distance driver, but I need to make sure that it's gonna fade to the left as I'm throwing it backhand. Next up is my most reliable distance driver, and this is my Proton Mayhem. So I will throw this most often on long distance drives when I need an ever so slightly fade to the right, or turn to the right, excuse me, that will then fade back to the left. Lastly, I have my Tenacity. This thing comes in at about 168 weighted, so it's a little bit lighter, and this thing will flip like nobody's business. So I tend to use this when it's less windy and when I need it to make sure that it's gonna go to the right more than my Mayhem will. So I would like to thank you for sitting here and listening to my Spring 2022 bag collection. Special shout out to Adopt Disc Golf. For all your disc golf needs, make sure that you adopt disc golf. And I'm Tristan the Christian, signing off.